benefit of those who have joined today. Have anybody joined us today? New?
But it's okay, you still revise.
I still revise, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, what we're trying to do is understand, how social psychology in a more structured manner. Try to research, have a structured research method to go so that we can make social psychology also a scientific study. All right. So, but then we'll be talking about various aspects like social thinking, social influence, and social relations of the people in general. The main three operations which are relevant to this is that careful collection of observation data, making hypotheses and theories from observation, and conducting tests and predicting the future based on the results of such tests. Okay. So basically, when we do induction, it's a research reasoning method. So you just collect data, you spot the patterns in the data, and then you you develop theories. Then you come up with hypothesis, which can be negated. By that we can prove theories. So this is basically how we are going to go. But then when you talk about collection of data in the social setting, it is not as simple as any other science, because in society, what are the different ways of collecting social psychology data on social psychology is very difficult, basically, because you can probably get some details from the books of philosophers, from novels, from dramas, playwrights, or probably you can deduce from common sense and all that. But then the problem with collecting data is that none of that is a good method of collecting data, because there's always going to be a lot of distortions and lot of assumptions, a lot of ways people will try to give wrong data, because they don't want to actually tell you what they feel. So works of people are usually contradictory in nature. One of them could say this way, like I gave the example of some of them say heaven is on earth, you have to enjoy your life in earth, and then some of them say here you have to be very strict with your rules and regulations, but later on, when you die, you'll go to a heaven. So that two contradictory ways people actually preach in the world. So it is very difficult to come up with any particular type of data which is similar across the different masses. Then common sense, we discuss those cases wherein uh, okay, this is the playwrights and the movies and artistic people and eminent authors who give contradictory statements. Okay, the contradictory statements, even so, for example, these are all for nowadays. When you see Google search also, video games are violent, they say, but at the same time, they say gaming is good for you. A lot of contradictory statements we get online also. And then what about common sense? So we proved that usually they said that common sense, like if it is heavy, then it will fall faster, but if it's light, it will fall slower, was the belief that Aristotle had told a long time back. But then one of our social psychologists, Berkovitz, said that but scientists have already proved that what Aristotle said is wrong, because Galileo did an experiment wherein he threw two different sizes of balls and with two different weights, and yet both of them fell at the same time. um, this was done in two experiments. One is Delft Tower experiment, which happened in 1586, and one was Galileo's experiment, which happened in 1589, where they disproved that common sense might say that if it is heavy, it will fall faster, but then it does not happen that way. Both objects fall at the same time. So common sense is actually disproved. That means it can't be relied on. So based on this, any other social experiment, any other social psychological experiment also cannot be relied on. You cannot be used. Common sense cannot be relied upon for such data collection. That is what they say. Then about distorted perception. See, when it comes to data, there is always one person says that I am right, the other person says no, you're wrong, but this is only right. So each person to person there is a lot of distortion in the in things. Plus we being human beings, we have all sorts of other elements. When we think we believe something, we generally try to only see things which are supporting our belief systems. So we tend to see things that fit our assumption, even if this involves distortion or omission. So we have 6 different types of distortions over here: selective abstraction, minimization, personalization, arbitrary inference, and magnification and overgeneralization. Basically what we are doing is, each person based on their beliefs, each person based on their way of life, each based on what they think is right, they will either distort the image of the other person, or they would totally omit certain things, so that only those things which support themselves, they will be talking only about that. For example, if we are if we don't like a person, no matter how many good things that person does, we still choose to see only those 1 or 2 bad things that they do. And then you prove to everybody saying, see, he's a bad person because he does these bad things, but there will be 5 other good things that he would have done, but we will choose not to accept it, or we will omit it when we tell it to the other person, because we want the other person to believe our assumption, right? So that is the kind of people we are. There are many types like that. So but then this is not helping, right? When they collect data, if each person is telling as per their will and wish, the data is not not authentic or not really true. So these are all the different reasons or different issues which we face while collecting proper data, for which is the basis of the entire research for social psychology. So here we are trying to make social psychology a very scientific science by trying to quantify everything, measure everything, and conduct experiments to find out patterns. But then the point is that the basic itself is there are a lot of challenges when it comes to collection of data. So when will a research be accepted as a scientific research? When it is verifiable. Okay, that is, if I do a research and come up with an something, another person, if they do the same experiment, they should also have to get the same result, then only it is a authentic research. Predictability, that is, if I research and come up with some data, that if I use that result, and if I should try to predict the future, and it should be predictable, and plus it should happen correctly. That is, if the future prediction actually becomes valid based on the research that we have done, then it is a good research. Falsifiability, that means we have to come up with a hypothesis which can be disproved, or which can be falsifiable. That is usually what we do: we come up with theories from the data, and then we find a hypothesis which is opposite in nature, and then we try to prove the hypothesis is false. And by default, if a hypothesis is false, then automatically the theory becomes true. So that is the kind of methodology we usually go for in scientific research. So a hypothesis which we come up with should be falsifiable. And then fairness, so all data needs to be included in the research, so that a proper and fair result can be arrived. Just like we talked about the assumption slide, so we also as a researcher should not exclude certain data because you think that data is not going to support the theory that I want to prove. So you cannot exclude like that. So you have to take all the data, and then you have to do the research based on that. So that being fair and not trying to cheat the way through the research is very important. This is like, because the flowchart looked very too much complicated, so I just thought I saw this slide, I thought it was very pretty, very simple. So observation was the first thing. That is, by the way, we are collecting data through observation. And then the second one is we question what is what are the theories we can come up with, what is the generalization we can do based on this observation on the entire population. So if we observe 10 South Indians eating idli, can we generalize that entire South Indians are idli eaters? So that is like, that's one of, like, for example, so that's like a question, and then you collect more data and you do research on that data, then you make a guess, that is hypothesis. So you make a guess, then you experiment on that guess. Okay, with that data that you've collected, you will analyze the data and finally make a conclusion. That's how a scientific research happens. Okay. Okay, so then methods of data collection. Okay, so we can observe through observation, then through questionnaires. Okay, by and through interviews and focus group sessions. These are the various ways with which we usually collect data. Now then we come to methods of analysis. Then what do we do with the data that we have collected? We analyze the data. Okay, so we have various methods by which we analyze. One is observational method, correlation method, experimental method, and ethnography. Okay, so when you say observation, it's nothing but describing the world around us, describing what we are seeing, and making notes on the way people are behaving, way the entire society is behaving, depending on whatever is the research. Okay, correlation is seeing the relationship between these various things that's happening in the observation. All right, and the experimental method is nothing but knowledge through systematic intervention. That means we try to control all the variables which are irrelevant for our research, and only see if that a particular thing works that way or not. Okay, for that if we control all the rest, we can be sure that this is the reason this thing is happening. So that is experimental method. So we obviously prefer the experimental method for the hardcore scientific way that we are doing things. All right, but then every method has its own pluses and minus. We started with the observation method last time. The observation method is basically behavior of human being is exactly observed. The people and there are many reasons why it is useful, right? The people who cannot speak, deaf and children, people who do not wish to disclose their affairs. So, how to ascertain details about such a group? What about the religious, you know, uh, groups? They may not be very happy to, tell details and all those things. So, in all these cases, observation method is very useful. Then we have types of observation. Naturalistic, that is observing behaviors in their natural setting without awareness or manipulation or intervention. So as they are observing from afar. Okay, participant is observing behaviors in a natural setting through active participation in the situation or manipulation of the environment. So they are participating, that means naturally something's happening, plus you are also engaging in that activity, and you're observing from close quarters. But whatever you're doing is manipulating the environment and the situation, and you're also observing the way things change based on your participation. Then laboratory. Okay, in this case everything is control setting. Okay, everything is like nothing can be changed, nothing will be a surprise element over here. The researcher is going to control all other elements which is irrelevant for the research, and only either he will participate in it or he will look from outside and see how things work. For example, this is the naturalistic way where the chimpanzees are in its natural environment, and an observer is noticing it. Here, if you see, this is the last one, the controlled environment where nothing else controlled comes into the picture. The chimpanzees are playing over here, they're doing their thing, but then our researcher is also participating in it in a controlled manner, depending on whatever she is manipulating. And here it is again a controlled environment, but then here the researcher is not participating, is sitting from afar and noticing and observing what is happening on the insides. So these are the different ways, observation method of data collection and analysis happens. All right. Okay, so this is an interesting game show that is happening, Big Boss. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Big Boss. This is nothing but another observational method of experimentation. Here, participants are inside this place for quite a few days, 100 days, and then they go about doing whatever they do. But it's a controlled environment. There is only so much resource available. There is time. Every now and then a manipulation is done, a trigger is given, some game is given, so to see how they actually behave. Some competitions are held to see who is the leader of the house, and then how rest of them take sides, then how the bias happens, how the backbiting happens, how people forget that they are being watched by the cameras and they start behaving the way they behave. And there are yet others who are so conscious about the cameras that they behave in a very camera conscious way, always trying to put their face into the camera and gain mileage by directly conversing with the big boss or with the with the viewers and like that. So this is a very good example of a social experiment that is happening, which is self-funding itself because it's very popular game show, and people are uh, paying to watch this show, but at the same time giving a lot of valuable input to the researchers about human behavior, and how different type of triggers or different types of independent variables are having an influence on the dependent variables which are on the inside. So this is where we had stopped yesterday. Okay, and so just a little bit more about the observation method. So these of course the various ways of observing. The observation method involves watching people and describing their behavior, sometimes referred to as field observation. This can involve creating a scenario in a lab and then watching how people respond or perform naturalistic observation in the own subject's environment. Okay, now we had just seen this big boss and all those slides which I just shown before. So it's basically explaining just that. Can you see the four types of observational research? One is complete observer, the white one is the researcher. The first circle, the white one is the researcher who's away from the group. Okay, so that means complete observer. Observer as a participant, right? So there is a man, the participant on the inside. Okay, so the researcher has gone inside and he is participating in the group. So observer has become a participant in the group. In the third one, participant as observer. So there is an observer in the group, but he does not participate in what is happening in the group. He's merely watching what is happening, but he is also inside the group. He is not like standing separately outside. And then a complete participant. So here this researcher is also a part of this group, and he's completely participating from his side also. Have you seen in the big boss, there is one participant they send in between, right? Just like that, who comes in like a celebrity inside, they come and stay here for 4 5 days and all that. So that is like a researcher coming in between. The second slide, a researcher comes in between and participates with the other group members, but actually they are proper researcher. They participate, but they are in a researching, they are in a they don't contribute much. They are gathering information from the rest of them. But the last bit is where the researcher is a part of the group, contributing to the group, behaving with the group. That is a complete participant. All right, so that is the four ways where observational research can be done. Hmm. So okay, don't get scared by the slide. Mm. Okay, so they have mentioned here IPA, interaction process analysis. So this is like a most formal type of observational method in which in which the researcher uses predetermined category for scoring social behavior. For example, see, there are 12 categories of social behavior. All right. Somebody is saying something. Okay. We'll do the questions in the end, Nasima. Okay, I just don't want to stop the flow. Um, I'll come back to that slide. All right. So interaction process analysis is the formal way or structured way of doing a social observation method, in which it is a predetermined way, in the sense the categories are already predetermined, that in a group setting how will people behave, right? There are like 12 categories, so anything and everything that happens in the group are categorized in this 12 settings. Okay. They have not given this details, but I thought it was interesting, so I made this slide for you. So the first one is ego boosts, raises other status. So if somebody does something, they will categorize it as an ego boost. Then somebody who releases tension, who jokes, laughs, shows satisfaction. Then agrees, who's always agreeing or concurs, who's taking sides and gives their acceptance. Then gives suggestions. Then there are a few others who give opinion. There are a few others who give orientation, lot of information, and lot of repeats, clarification. Those are different type of people. Then asks for orientation. Some people are like, they behave as though they don't understand anything. Can somebody explain to me how does this work? That is a different kind of person. Then asks for opinion and asks for suggestion. Then there is again another type which is called disagrees with most of the things that happen, shows tension, asks for help, withdraws out of field, and antagonizes, deflates other status, defends or asserts self. See, even the more I read about it, the more I want to call Bigg Boss into the picture. Because if those of you are not familiar with Bigg Boss, could probably watch a few episodes just to understand how this thing happens. This is exactly how it is being the interactions between people are categorized, and accordingly different kinds of issues, different kinds of problems are identified. Like if you see over here on the right side, it shows gives orientation and asks for orientation, right? So those are problems of orientation. Then problems of evaluation. Then problems of control, right? Yeah. Okay. And then there is problem of decision. So all these, then problems of tension management and problems of integration. So these are the various combinations which they identify in people, and they identify what are the problems that these people are having. And then with this they will identify who is the leader of the group. They will identify who is the person who's the instigating person, who's the person who's trying to get more, who's having the control, and who's trying to get more control, who's popular. So they try to ascertain based on these kind of categories. So this is called interaction process analysis. All right, this was by Bales in 1950, and there is a very big, it's a big topic by itself. A lot of research has gone into this, and there are books especially for knowing more about this. So those who are interested should pick up more books on this. This is a very practical way, observational method of analysis is being applied in the modern social science, social psychology place, right? Scene. Okay. So then, slide, please move. Okay. My slide is not moving forward. All right. So in observation method, the problem is that, okay, this is the problem of the observation method. See, there is a program. Okay, something happens, and then that is what you do, and then you see what in and the observations what you see. Okay, so you think that what you have manipulated, and that has caused these observations. But the problem is, it is not so simple. There are like 5 other alternative causes for the same observation to happen. Okay, so now you cannot really be sure that this is the reason for this kind of a thing that is happening, right? So that cause is totally irrelevant over here. It is so difficult to find a cause. Okay, so you observe that it rains and then people start getting malaria, but then the point is that people get malaria, I mean, sorry, not malaria, it rains and then people are getting sick. So it rains and people are getting sick, although looks like a very good observation. Point is there are multiple causes. It could be because of malaria that people are getting, I mean, mosquitoes, people are getting sick. It could be because of viral infection that people are getting sick. It could be because of bacterial infection. It could be because of just about anything others, you know. So we cannot, based on just the observational method, there are not much scope for us to come up with proper causes, come up with proper, you know, conclusions based on observation method. So that is the challenge of the observation method. So in any research, for us to know the cause is very important, and causality is one of the major things for any research method. So then we go to correlation method. Okay, in correlation method, like the name itself suggests, is correlation, relation. So between the two variables, what is the relationship? That's all is correlation. Okay, so now it means that if variable A goes up, does variable B go up too? Okay, if the variable A goes up and variable B goes up, there is a correlation. If a variable A comes down and variable B comes down, correlation. If a variable A goes up and simultaneously variable B comes down, that is also correlation. So that there is some relationship or the other. Did one thing start and the other thing immediately reacts to that and changes. So if one thing goes up or down, the other thing also reacts and goes up or down. That is all is correlation. All right, and when you say correlation coefficient, it is a statistic. It's just a measurement or a value which assesses, you know, you can predict one variable from another. That is, if you have x, you know, you can predict y. That is statistical coefficient basically. Okay, so for example, now if you see, whenever you have a statistical coefficient, it is usually between I mean, it is between -1 and +1. So when the value that you get is more closer to a +1 or a -1, then you can say the relationship between both the variables is strong. Okay. No, but when it is more closer to positive, I mean to +1, it is called positive correlation, and when it is more closer to the -1, it is called negative correlation. But the correlation is strong. That much is confirmed. For example, when you say positive correlation, it means the um, the more it rains, I mean, sorry, not rains, the hotter it is, the ice cream sale goes up. Now that is positive correlation, where one thing goes up, the other thing also goes up, right? So that is positive correlation. But when it is very hot, the coffee sales go down. That means it is a negative correlation. So all there is still a strong connection between 1 and 2. Okay, but the problem is that it is working the other way around. So that is still a correlation, that is still a relationship, that is still having some direct effect on the other variable, but it is in the negative way. Okay, that is the difference between positive correlation and the negative correlation. Okay. Okay, so this is like, just to understand, you know, here it is like, you know, they're showing the range. Just to understand, see, when we get a lot of data, the data is plotted like this. Okay, between the x and the y axis. So x being one variable and y being one variable, and the data is plotted like this. So if you see in the middle, right, where it is saying 0, that means that is the data. When it is plotted, there is no clear indication which side the relationship is going. That means there is no relationship at all. that means there is no correlation at all right. But if you see in the plus zero point 0.5 or a minus zero point 0.5, you can say that there is a light tendency towards the right or a light tendency towards the left. So there is a weak correlation. That means, okay, there seems to be some relationship, but it is very weak, not really very great relationship between two variables. A zero point 0.9 looks like very clear that it is going that side, so it's a strong correlation. The relationship is like pakka 100% something is happening because of the you know the other variable, right? Perfect positive is like when it's exactly one, that means it's linear. Everything as 1% goes up in this, 1% goes up in this, it's like very correct and accurate, which is like very for book purpose it could be linear linear lines are a possibility, but most of the data will be in a similar way as point 0 zero point 0.9 on a negative or on a positive way. Most of the data, when you look at the graph, it should easily be visible to us which side it is going, right? So when you see that it is going on the right side, on the positive side, we know that it is strongly positive. So when one variable goes up, the other variable is also going up. And when it is going on the left side, we know that when see, can you see the axis? When the x-axis is when the y-axis is going up, the x-axis is going down. So it is a negative thing. That is, when one variable is going up, the other one is going down. So negative correlation, but it's a strong correlation. All right. Yeah, this is the example I just was telling you about here. So to manage supplies, the three scatter plots were made to see if there was any correlation between daily temperatures and sales of ice cream, hamburger, and coffee. So what they thought, see in the right, in the below the lower side, it's written temperature. So if you see, the temperature is going up 16, 18, 20, 22, it's going up to 34 degrees Celsius. And on the left side, the sales is given 30 to 130. That means, so as the temperature is going up, what is happening to ice cream sales? If you see, as the temperature is going up, see when it was 16, that ice cream sales was less than 30. But when the temperature went up to 26, the ice cream sales went up to 60. And when the temperature went up to 34, ice cream sale went up to 90. So very clearly we can see that there is a positive correlation which is happening over here. So as the temperature goes up, the sales of ice cream is also going up. So there is a strong positive correlation. Now you come to the middle one, the hamburger one, right? The same detailing is given, the temperature below and the sales is on the left. Okay, here what has happened is, as the temperature when it was 16, right, as the temperature is going up, the sales of the hamburger is going down. That means when there was 16 degrees, they were selling 130 hamburgers, but as it became 24 degrees, the hamburger sale has come down to 90. And when it went up to 34 degrees Celsius, the hamburger sales came down to 55. Okay, 50. All right. So now this is a very clear indication that as the temperature is going up, the sale of hamburger is coming down. That means there is a negative correlation. So both the temperature and the purchase of hamburger is related, and it is negatively related. All right. But if you see on the right side, no, there is no clear correlation. They are plotting the dots, okay, and then one day when there is a 16, okay, when there is 16 degrees Celsius, there is only 60 coffee drinkers. But then when there are 24 degrees Celsius, it is 24. And then when there is 32 degrees, it is again come down to 40. So the plots, they're plotting the points every day, and they're saying that it actually, it's very random, and there is no particular way it is going either left or right. So that means there is no zero correlation. There is no relationship between the heat and the coffee, right? So here the point is that we all love our coffees, and no matter how hot it is, we will have our coffees because it's our poison. Without half coffee, we can't work. All right. But that is the deduction that we are making, but there is no correlation between the heat or the weather and the coffee sales. I think this is very clear as to how correlation can be determined between two variables. All right. So then we go next to limitation of correlation, just the way we had told about limitation of observation method. See, again here we are talking about causality. Okay, what is the cause? What is the cause? It is very easy in the previous one for us to say the heat is more, that is why they're preferring ice cream. But then the point is, if that was true, the heat is more, they should not have preferred coffee, right? It didn't work that way. There is no particular cause. It's sometimes we might think we can infer a cause seeing the correlation, but then it is not really the cause, or it may not be the real cause, right? For example, see this diagram over here. The number of shaved heads are there in the organization, the sales seems to be going up, right? Now this, there is a clear correlation over here in the map. The shaved heads are going up, sales is also going up. So, and this manager is saying, everybody pick up a razor and shave your heads, right? If this is how we were all supposed to work on all the scientific data that we get, then just imagine what kind of society will be we be making. It will be a joke actually. So that is the example where they're giving, where the results are only inferences and not conclusive. It is giving an indication that it could be, the cause could be in this direction, right? It's just an indication. It is not a conclusive cause of what is happening. Correlation gives causal direction, but not actual causality. So for us, causality is very important. For us, it is, why do we do a research? We want to know what caused something, so that in future we can make a prediction saying that this thing causes this thing, so this is how we have to handle it, right? That is how we have to apply research somewhere, right? To apply research, we need proper and pakka data, pakka understanding of what is happening. For that, causality is a very important thing for us. So correlation is not utilized where we need causality. Correlation as a method is utilized for us to give a proper a direction towards what we should work towards, and about the relationship between various variables, but they are not, correlations not seen as a method, as a pakka method for scientific study. All right. Right.
And
See again,
one more
here
example.
in this case also, there's a hot sunny day. Okay, and there is a correlation between ice creams and sunburn. So they're saying that people, the more they get sunburned, the more they're getting ice cream, they're eating ice cream. So more sunburned people, more ice cream sales is happening. But that's not how correlation works. And that there is a clear correlation between sunburn and ice cream, but is that the cause? Because of sunburn the ice cream sales are going up, is it the cause? That is a stupid cause, right? The main cause is our our great son out there who's smiling and enjoying himself. He is the one who's causing both of it. He is the one who's causing the ice cream sales to go up. He is the one who's causing sunburn. But we are not seeing this part, right? Because for us, it is we are measuring these two, and it seems like very well correlated. So we are saying that okay, all the sunburned people are eating ice creams. So that is not making sense. So that is an example of why we can't use correlation as a conclusive method. So, who answers all these causal questions? Our wonderful experimental method. Okay. Now, the experimental method is the choice of most social psychological research because it allows causal inferences. Observational method helps describe social behavior. Correlation method helps us understand what aspect of social behavior are related. However, only a properly executed experiment allows us to draw conclusions about cause and effect. Cause and effect, our most famous thing is cause and effect. Okay. So what is experiment method or the scientific method? So now in this case, the point is that if I do a research today, like I told you in the beginning, right, we talked about what are the four points of scientific research, which is verifiable, predictable, falsifiable, and fairness, right? All this is very important for any research to be accepted as a proper research, and an experimental method can give us that answer to all four of that points, right? So what we do is we observe under controlled conditions, right? Like in the case of uh, there are like the example where I told you, where it rains and people are getting sick. There are like multiple causes over there for it to get sick. So we can't draw any cause and effect over there. But then if we have a controlled situation wherein people are in a laboratory kind of setup, and they are exposed to certain amount of rain on an measured way, then they'll be able to understand what is it, what they'll be able to draw samples. They'll be able to draw and see what is the amount of rain which is coming, what is the viruses, what are the viruses that are growing, what are the bacteria that are growing, how it is affecting the person inside. So a lot of details can be collected and experimented on, based on if the controlled situation is available. If it is a lab setting, they can control the measure of rain, they can control the vitals of the person, they can control how much amount of viruses are growing, they can control how much amount of bacteria is growing. So there are all the conditions are can be controlled, and that one variable they can manipulate and find out, okay, did this one cause it, yes or no, okay, this one did not cause it, take it away. Then we get another variable in and see, is this one causing it? So like that we can actually experiment every variable exclusively, and conclusively we can tell that this is the cause for this issue. All right. So what are the variables? So we did talk about in the research methods, we did talk about these three types of variables: independent variable, dependent variable, and intervening or controlled variable. All right. So we have talked about it. Basically, controlled variable is that anything which is not relevant to the experiment is being controlled or kept under control, so that it does not contribute to the experiment. Dependent variable is the test subject, right? The one which is actually going to react. Okay. And independent variable is why, if is the manipulation that the researcher is putting into this environment, okay, to get the reaction from the test subject. Okay. So for example, in what do you say, that in a room they have 10-year-olds. Okay. All of them are 10-year-olds, all of them are boys, all of them are from same financial and cultural background. Then that means all the variables are controlled over here. There is no difference in the person's age, no difference in the gender, there is no difference in cultural background. So any element which can add a change to the experiment is tried to be is made same, is made equal or made control. They are being controlled, that is controlled variable. All right. Then so then they then the dependent variable is, say, the boy's happiness. What excites the children, that is the variable that they're trying to find out. Okay. So the excitement of the children is what we are testing, that is the dependent variable. Now independent variable is what the researcher is introducing to the children. So they introduced chocolate, certain level of excitement. Fantastic. So chocolate gives 5%, 5 number, out of 0 to 10, on a scale of 0 to 10, chocolate gives 5 numbers of excitement. Brilliant. Then they introduced toys. Okay. And when the toys came, then the children's excitement was at 7. So okay, all other variables are controlled, so there is no other thing coming inside. There is only toys coming inside, which is the independent variable. And all these kids are getting excited over the toy, which is much more than the excitement they had for a chocolate. So then they record that. All right. And then what happens is they introduce a gaming console. That's it. All the kids are super excited, and their excitement level is at 9 or 10. Right. Now can you see what is an independent variable? every little manipulation that the researcher is bringing inside, okay, is called an independent variable. The chocolate, the toys, or the gaming console, that is an independent variable which the researcher has brought into to investigate, right, to see if what kind of reaction comes from the boys. Now the dependent variable is the that excitement level we are talking about, right? The excitement level that we are talking about is the dependent variable. Okay, so here we are testing the excitement level. So five numbers or seven numbers of excitement or 10 numbers of excitement. So we are measuring how much excitement does each independent variable give. And then controlled variable is all other aspects are controlled. So the socio-cultural background of the children are controlled, the gender is controlled, the what do you say, the age is controlled, the same setting, they're all in the same setting in the same room. So there is no difference in that, because we don't want all that to contribute to the level of excitement that the child is feeling. So that we can exclusively know how much excitement actually the children feel based on just the independent variable. All right, so that is how variables are determined for experimental method. Right. So that's the two different groups: experimental group, the group that is exposed to independent variable; a control group, a group that is exposed to the same experimental environment but is not given the treatment. For example, now to understand, now the two, what we talked about is like there's a group of boys and they introduce these chocolates and toys and gaming console, but it is only one group of boys. What do we have for comparison? We don't have anything for comparison. We only have pre introduction of chocolate and post introduction of chocolate, right? That is how we measure. Pre introduction of toys, how much excitement was there; post introduction of toys, how much extra thing is there, excitement is there. So we have the same group but we have pre and post measures. Okay, that is that's how. But then there is, that makes no sense for most of it, because we need to kind of like compare with another group, right? So we have a control group who is also the same settings, and they are in the same experimental environment, but they are not given these kind of toys or chocolates or anything, because they want to see generally within this time frame whether the kids get so excited or not, or only because of introduction of these variables will they become. So they have to have some other another group which and their results, so that we can compare both of them to get an actually wholesome result of whether the causality is exactly this or not. So when you say an experimental group, one group of 10 boys is experimental group, another group of 10 boys is control group. They are also in the same environment and everything, but they are not been given any of these independent variable or the manipulation or the treatment. All right. Yes, so that is about our experimental method. Under experimental method, we have quasi experimental method and true experimental method. Okay, so basically, true experimental method, like the name itself suggests, is nothing but it is proper experiments. Everything is under control. Everything is done in a very systematic, structural way. Okay, and there is a randomized, all these. Variables are introduced very randomly, and there is total control. All right, but in quasi experiment, but the problem with true experiment is the realism is less. Okay, because it is not, I mean, when you want to control everything, how can it be real? Because in real life there is so many things that will happen which will be uncontrollable, or which will just surprise us in an environment. uh, then so in true experimental study, when you want to control everything, there is realism of the experiment is actually very less. But in a quasi experimental research, what they do is they try to control uh, to a certain extent, but they do it in a natural setting, right, wherein there is the control might be less, but there is a realism is more. That means the setting is real, the people are real, we have limited amount of control, but then there is always a chance for something to happen, something to suddenly change. There is always that thing. But the problem, the plus in quasi is that it's more realistic, and the more proper details we can collect, which is actually very relevant to the research setting. So that is why quasi is more relevant to natural settings. But true experimental study is also is maximum, what do you call that, accepted, is maximum credence is given to true randomized experiment method. Yeah, again the same thing. A quasi is conducted in natural everyday life setting. Researcher has less than complete control. So realism is more, control is less. In true randomized experiment, to just give that randomized in the sense, we are only introducing all the subjects, right? The 10 people we are choosing randomly and putting in the box. But in quasi, now we are not doing the choosing. Natural setting means already 10 boys are there in that school. We are only introducing the variable over there. But in true randomized experiment, we are choosing the those boys in a randomized manner. Okay, but then we are choosing. We are not in quasi. There is no such choosing. There's no randomization. Whoever is available in the classroom, we will do the experiment on that person. That is how it is. Okay. Right. So we are going to experimental design. This isn't really anything, don't get scared by all the pictures that they put over there in the, there's not really much to the design. Basically, one short case study means there is one independent variable and there is one dependent variable. Okay, so they introduce the independent variable, they find the what happens to the dependent variable. So they have on what do you call that, um, uh, what's it, after they introduced something happened, that's all. That is all the data we have, that is the design, right? But in one group, pre-test post-test design, what they do is, there is one group before the research, what has happened before the independent variable, so they get two sets of data. One is, first they test the people, they get one set of data, then they introduced another variable, and then they get a second set of data with the reactions. Then they compare the first set, that is pre-test, and then the post-test. Both of them are compared, so that they have some kind of a comparison, and they'll be able to come up with some numbers and measurements and comparisons to quantify and measure the difference in the dependent variable because of the independent variable. So that is pre-test and post-test design. And then intact group comparison, basically like I just told you about the control group and experimental group. One group is a control group where no independent variable is introduced, and in another group independent variable is introduced. Now we are going to compare both the groups and find the results. Okay, so the comparison is done across two different groups. One which is everything is controlled and everything is the environment is same for both the groups, but in one group in independent variable is used, in the other one nothing is used. So and then they measure the results of both the groups. That is the intact group comparison. And our factorial experiment design is basically nothing that, till now we were talking about the x is the independent variable, right? There is one x in every experiment type of design we are showing. But here what we are doing is, we have multiple conditions, we have multiple independent variables, and we have multiple groups. Okay, this is like, it can go, this is showing 2 by 2, there could be 2 by 10, or there could be 4 by 4, like that, different variables. In mostly in our social setting, there are always multiple variables. Is it not? A proper experiment will usually be factorial experiment design, wherein there are multiple independent variables and there are multiple groups also. So here if you see, independent variables are 2, a1 and a2, and groups are 2, b1 and b2. So obviously we have to get all the 4 combinations. So first in the first left top corner is the combination of a1 and b1 what will happen? Then there is, and the second on the right side top corner, combination of A1 with B2 group. So that means A1 has been introduced to B1 group and A1 has been introduced to B2 group. Then they get the results of those. Then we have another variable A2 which has been introduced to B1, and then A2 has been introduced to B2, right? So then you get A2B1 and A2B2. That's it. So there are two variables which are introduced to two groups. They get the combination of all the results and then they analyze those results, they compare between them, and they try to find out whatever they want to find out. So this is an example of factorial experiment. Basically there are multiple variables, both independent as well as dependent variables. Multiple groups are there. So they try to various combination permutations and combinations are used, and they do a research and get a lot of data, and then they have a field day with research with data. They enjoy the data, and they do a lot of research for many years to come, and they come up with multiple ways it works, right? So that is the favorite factorial experimental design. Okay, now okay. So there is another section here for which I did not create a slide, so I'm going to talk about it. Threats to the validity in experimental research. Now see, when you do experimental research, what will happen? Okay, it looks like most of the time we are going on saying experimental design is so good, experimental method is fantastic, because it gives us a structured way of doing things, it gives us a very proper answers, it gives us proper causes, so it is a very good way of doing research. But then is the experimental method free of any kind of risks or challenges? No, it is not. It has its own issues. um, so the issue is that validity, that is the proper when you do a research, right? There are so many people involved in the research. One is the participants, one is the researchers, right? And then each of them have their own feelings, each of them have their own issues. So what will happen when the feelings of these people interfere with the experimental methods, right? That is confounding. Okay, the inference of causality is affected by confounded variables, right? That means it is the failure to separate two variables with the result of their effects cannot be independently ascertained, right? That means, see, if you use, for they've given a beautiful example in the textbook. When you're taking research participants, okay, you chose all older older participants as female and all younger participants as male, right? Then there is a clearly there is some kind of a bias that is happening over here, and the result which you're getting may not actually be correct, because you should have a good you cannot you cannot clearly say it is male and female. There could also be this age factor which could have been a element or a matter in the result that has come. So this is called confounding, wherein you're not clear whether the gender created this difference or the age has contributed to the difference. So such a thing is called confounding, wherein you can't find out the difference between causality because you have failed to separate the two variables. Then social desirability. Okay, here in this case, so when we have participants, we're talking about social psychology over here, right? So whom are we doing all these experiments on? We're doing experiments on people. Then when they know that they're having experiments done, they have that social desirability, right? Oh god, I didn't notice it is already 10:08. Okay, but let me just finish this. So there is a social desirability that they should what do you call that, they should tell about themselves in a positive light. People, whoever is listening to them, they should feel nice about them. So the participant can actually without your knowledge or with the with intent, they will try to give positive data to the the interviewer or anything. So they want to feel a part of the research, and they will kind of I mean, not feel part of the research, they kind of want to project something nice about themselves to the interviewers. So that is social desirability, issue. And then we have demand characteristics. Here what is happening is, now the participants know for what reason they're doing this research, right? So they know that this is what that researcher is trying to prove. Before they go into think, most of the people, they discuss what is the for what reason. They, everybody will ask, for what are you asking all these questions, what do you want to prove, what is this research about. Before we tell one good thing about ourselves, we will ask 100 questions, is it not? So that is how we are as people. And then demand characteristics, basically we are learning from the researcher for what they are doing this research, what are they trying to prove. And then when you're giving your interview or you're answering your questionnaire, you give those answers which you think the researcher will like. You give those answers which you think will make the research successful. You become a part of that research team in your mind, and you want to make the researcher successful because you're part of that experiment, and whatever I'm part of should become successful. So we try to give those answers which make sense for the research, and which will make the research a success, or which will prove the theory right. So that is demand characteristics, where the participant starts giving uh, desired answers. Okay. Then experimenter expectancy effect. Okay. Now see, the thing is, it says that refer to the experimenter's own hypothesis or expectation about the outcome of the research. It increases the likelihood that the participants will behave in such a way as to confirm the hypothesis. Okay, this is looks like same thing. Just a second, guys, I want to read it once again. Mm, mm. Okay, now both these things sound similar to me. Um, I think one is from the participant side, and the other one is from the researcher side. That is that is the two different side. Where one in one side the experimenter is explaining to the participants the way he thinks the participant should answer, and then the participant picks it up and he answers that way. In other one, where the participant himself is interested in making the thing success, and so he tries to impress the researcher by giving whatever he thinks the researcher wants. So in one way, the researcher is trying to give details to the participant in such a way about the instrument, in such in experiment, in such a way that the participant behaves in a particular way. Okay, like that. Okay. So then there are certain ways to minimize these effects. See, they're telling that we can minimize these effects by doing all these things. That is how to get over these threats. So post experimental inquiry, okay, basically they are just kind of interviewing the participants once again after the experiment is done to understand what went on. Obtrusive measures. Okay, in this one, no, the participant is not at all aware of for what reason they are they are giving this experiment. Okay, but then the point is that it may not actually serve the purpose, because most of the time social reaction is always based on something that happens, right? So if you're not aware of for what reason you're standing there, and why suddenly they are giving you chocolate, and you are like, okay, am I supposed to react or not? In experimental method, it is so funny. They are in a laboratory, and then they suddenly introduce something to you. You don't know what to do with it. So again, it is not helping with the research properly, right? Then cover story, they're saying that, okay, instead of saying no reasons for why they are doing the experiment, why don't we tell some wrong reasons, right? Then we let us tell some lie about the purpose of the experiment, so that the real purpose only the researcher will know. But then again, that is also is difficult, because now the participant starts working towards the lie, and the again unnecessarily we are complicating things over here, and there is no clear way of knowing whether the participants data is actually correct or not. And another strategy is to reduce experimenter expectancy effect, that is to keep the experimenter blind to the hypothesis under test, or at least blind to the condition to which the given participant has been allocated. That means between the participant and the experimenter, there is a lot of a distance. The experimenter is kept blind about the participants, and the participants are kept blind about the experiment, so as to reduce these kind of impressionisms or these kind of ways with which data could get corrupted. But then no matter what you try, there is always an opportunity for some kind of an error or the other. So a good way to go about this is getting a lot of data, so that even if there are some skewed data like this which are probably ruining um, the research, there will be other data which will compensate for it. So it is important to get a lot of data. Okay, so it is 10:15 and we still have ethnography to go. Do you guys want to continue, or can I do it in another class?
No, let's continue, Sunita. Let's finish it off today.
Right.
How much time do you think you'll take, Sunita?
15 minutes. I can start in the next class and you can continue, Seema, maybe.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's keep
We can
today
do that. Yeah, it's
tomorrow
getting a
and
little heavy duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it tomorrow, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, that
Sharp at 9 we can start,
yeah.
and then I can continue.
yeah.
Okay.
Then we can have 2 days. Sorry.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
thinking we can finish it in one day,
We'll
but
see. Yeah, yeah. So I'll see if it is. I don't know. I've not even read the chapter now. So my